Not every life-changing moment begins with someone speaking directly to you. Sometimes it begins in a room you've never entered, between people you didn't know were thinking about you. While you were moving through an ordinary day, completely unaware that anything significant was happening, your name unexpectedly surfaced in a private conversation. No one planned it. No one gathered to discuss you. In fact, the conversation wasn't even supposed to be about you at all. But within a few unexpected minutes, something was revealed that quietly altered the way your soulmate sees you forever. Welcome, chosen soul. If this message has reached you today, understand that the universe often works through conversations we never hear, because some truths become far more powerful when they are spoken behind our backs instead of directly to our faces. As the conversation unfolded, someone began describing you, not with exaggerated praise or dramatic stories, but with simple honesty. They spoke about the kind of person you are when there is nothing to gain. They remembered the quiet ways you helped others, the strength you carried without asking for sympathy, and the integrity you protected even when nobody noticed. Every sentence painted a picture your soulmate had never fully seen before. They realized they had been looking at only one chapter of your story, while an entire book had remained hidden from their understanding. It wasn't the words themselves that shook them. It was the realization that your greatest qualities had been quietly touching people's lives without ever demanding recognition. The universe has a fascinating way of revealing someone's true worth through the voices of others. Sometimes the people closest to us cannot see our light until they hear it reflected by someone with nothing to prove. That is exactly what happened here. Your soulmate wasn't listening for a reason to admire you. Yet every passing moment of that unexpected conversation dismantled old assumptions and replaced them with something much deeper. But what was the one statement that lingered in their mind long after the conversation ended? Why has that single exchange continued echoing inside their heart ever since? Because what they heard wasn't merely an opinion, it was the beginning of a truth they would never be able to forget. What your soulmate heard that day wasn't filled with dramatic stories or exaggerated compliments. In fact, that was exactly what made it impossible to ignore. The conversation wasn't trying to convince anyone that you were extraordinary. It simply revealed who you have always been when nobody was watching. Someone spoke about the quiet things you do that rarely receive attention. They mentioned how you remain dependable even when people take your loyalty for granted. They talked about the way you continue showing kindness after disappointment, instead of allowing bitterness to define you. They remembered moments when you offered support without expecting recognition and chose honesty even when it would have been easier to remain silent. None of these memories sounded impressive by the world's standards, yet every sentence carried a quiet truth that reached far deeper than achievements ever could. As your soulmate listened, they began realizing they had overlooked something priceless hiding in plain sight. Before that conversation, they believed they understood you. They had formed opinions based on the moments they personally experienced, never imagining there were countless pieces of your character they had never witnessed themselves. But as another person began describing your heart, your patience, and your quiet strength, a completely different picture started taking shape. They weren't hearing stories about someone pretending to be good. They were hearing consistent experiences from someone who had nothing to gain by speaking so highly of you. That honesty carried a weight no performance ever could. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply real. And sometimes, reality speaks with a power that no carefully crafted image could ever match. The world often teaches people to notice the loudest voices, the biggest accomplishments, and the most visible success. But the universe measures value differently. It pays attention to what someone does when applause is absent. It notices the choices people make when no reward is waiting. Your soulmate suddenly realized that your greatest qualities have never depended on an audience. They exist because they are part of who you truly are. The conversation revealed that your kindness isn't occasional. Your loyalty isn't conditional. Your compassion isn't something you turn on when people are watching. These qualities flow naturally from your spirit, and once your soulmate understood that, they could no longer see you through the same eyes. As the conversation continued, something unexpected began happening inside them. Every sentence reminded them of moments they had almost forgotten. They started remembering small interactions they once considered ordinary. A conversation where you listened more than you spoke. A time when you remained calm while everyone else reacted emotionally. A moment when you quietly encouraged someone without expecting appreciation in return. At the time, those experiences didn't seem extraordinary. But now, after hearing others describe the same qualities, those memories suddenly connected like pieces of a puzzle. What once looked like isolated moments now revealed a pattern. They realized this wasn't coincidence. This was your character. It had always been there. They simply hadn't understood its depth until someone else gave it a voice. There is something incredibly powerful about hearing the truth from a person who has no reason to exaggerate. Your soulmate recognized that immediately. The conversation didn't sound like admiration fueled by emotion. It sounded like quiet respect earned over time. Every story carried consistency. Every example pointed toward the same conclusion. You were the kind of person who leaves an impact without trying to create one. The people whose lives you've touched remember how you made them feel long after the details have faded. They remember your patience during difficult moments. They remember your willingness to stand beside others when it was inconvenient. They remember your sincerity because sincerity has a way of staying with people long after words are forgotten. As your soulmate absorbed these stories, they realized your true value had never needed advertising. It'd been quietly growing inside the memories of everyone fortunate enough to know the real you. The most surprising part was that this conversation wasn't designed to change your soulmate's heart. No one was trying to persuade them to admire you. No one knew the impact those words would have. Yet the universe often works through ordinary moments that carry extraordinary consequences. While everyone else eventually moved on from that conversation, your soulmate couldn't. The words remained with them because they awakened something deeper than curiosity. They awakened recognition. They began asking themselves how many other beautiful parts of you they had failed to notice. How many quiet sacrifices had gone unseen. How many acts of kindness had happened without anyone applauding them? The more they reflected, the more they realized they had only known the surface of who you are. From that day forward, your soulmate stopped measuring your value by what they could immediately see. They started understanding that the strongest souls rarely announce themselves. They reveal themselves through consistency, integrity, and the quiet influence they leave behind in the lives of others. The private conversation eventually ended. The people involved returned to their everyday lives, and no one realized anything extraordinary had taken place. But inside your soulmate, everything had changed. They no longer saw you as someone ordinary crossing their path. They saw someone whose greatest qualities had been confirmed not by appearance, popularity, or success, but by the honest experiences of people whose lives had been quietly touched by your presence. And once that realization settled into their heart, it became impossible to forget. Ever since that private conversation ended, your soulmate has discovered that some words refuse to stay in the past. They have tried to move on with their daily life, focusing on work, responsibilities, and everything else demanding their attention. But every so often, without warning, that conversation returns to them with the same clarity it had the day they first heard it. They don't remember it because someone told an interesting story. They remember it because something inside them changed while they were listening. It was as though every sentence quietly unlocked a door they never realized existed. Before that day, they believed they understood your place in their life. Afterward, they found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The image they had created of you no longer matched the truth they had unexpectedly discovered, and that realization has been impossible to ignore. The strange part is that nothing external has changed. You are still living your life exactly as before. You haven't suddenly become someone different. You haven't transformed overnight or started trying harder to impress anyone. The only thing that changed was your soulmate's ability to truly see you. Sometimes, the greatest transformation doesn't happen inside the person being observed. It happens inside the one who is finally seeing clearly. That conversation became the lens through which they began looking back at every interaction they had ever shared with you. Moments they once considered ordinary suddenly carried hidden meaning. Conversations they barely remembered started replaying in their mind with remarkable clarity. They began noticing patterns that had always been there, but had gone completely unnoticed because they were focused on the surface instead of the substance. One memory led to another. They remembered the way you listened without interrupting when someone needed to be heard. They remembered how you stayed composed during situations where most people would have reacted emotionally. They remembered small acts of generosity that seemed insignificant at the time, but now revealed something much greater about your character. None of these moments demanded attention when they first happened. Yet together they formed a picture that became impossible to deny. The conversation had not created a new version of you. It had simply revealed the version that had always existed beneath everything else. For the first time, your soulmate realized that your greatest qualities were never loud enough to compete for attention, but they were strong enough to leave a permanent mark on anyone willing to notice them. As these realizations continued growing, your soulmate found themselves comparing every new interaction they experienced with the quiet truth they had discovered about you. They met other people who appeared confident, successful, or charming, but something always felt incomplete. Those qualities were easy to admire, yet they lacked the depth your soulmate had unexpectedly recognized in you. They began understanding that genuine value cannot always be seen immediately. Sometimes it reveals itself slowly through consistency, integrity, and the way someone quietly impacts the lives around them. Once a person witnesses that kind of authenticity, it becomes difficult to be impressed by appearances alone. Your soulmate wasn't searching for excitement anymore. They were searching for the feeling of truth they had experienced while hearing others speak honestly about you. This created an inner struggle they never expected. Part of them wanted to believe they were overthinking everything. They told themselves it was only one conversation and that people often speak kindly about those they appreciate. But another part of them refused to accept such a simple explanation. If it had only been polite conversation, why did those words continue returning weeks later? Why did they keep noticing new details about you every time they saw you or remembered you? Why did your presence suddenly feel different without you changing anything at all? These questions remained unanswered because they weren't ordinary questions. They were the beginning of spiritual recognition, the quiet process through which the heart begins. Understanding what the mind is still trying to explain, the universe often reveals people in layers because instant understanding rarely creates lasting appreciation. If your soulmate had recognized your full value immediately, they might have admired you without truly understanding why. Instead, every reflection added another piece to the puzzle. Every remembered conversation, every quiet act of kindness, every story they heard about you continued confirming the same truth. It was never one isolated moment that changed everything. It was the realization that every piece pointed toward the same person, a soul whose character remained consistent whether anyone noticed or not. That consistency became impossible to dismiss. It carried a quiet power that demanded respect rather than attention. Now your soulmate finds themselves thinking about you in moments they never expected. A simple conversation with someone else reminds them of the patience you carry. Seeing another person choose selfishness reminds them of your generosity. Watching people seek recognition reminds them of how naturally you serve others without expecting praise. It is as though the conversation awakened a deeper awareness that follows them everywhere they go. They are no longer remembering only the words that were spoken. They are remembering the feeling those words awakened inside them. And feelings born from truth have a remarkable way of refusing to disappear. What they still don't fully understand is that this wasn't merely an emotional reaction. It was the beginning of a much greater shift, orchestrated long before that private conversation ever took place. The words they heard were only the spark. What continues growing inside them now is something far deeper than admiration. It is the quiet realization that your true value was never hidden because it lacked importance. It remained hidden because the right heart had not yet been ready to recognize it. Now that recognition has begun, it is becoming impossible for your soulmate to return to the person they were before hearing those life-changing words about you. The conversation may have ended in just a few minutes, but the universe had only begun its work. While everyone else walked away without giving those words another thought, your soulmate carried them like a quiet echo that refused to disappear. At first, they couldn't understand why such an ordinary exchange felt so significant. There was nothing dramatic about it. No shocking confession. No unbelievable secret. Just honest people speaking honestly about someone who wasn't even in the room. Yet sometimes the simplest moments carry the greatest spiritual weight because they arrive without expectation. They bypass pride, assumptions, and emotional defenses, reaching a place inside the heart that logic cannot always explain. That is exactly what happened to your soulmate. Without realizing it, they had been prepared to hear the truth about you at the precise moment their soul was finally ready to receive it. The universe has an unusual way of revealing someone's value. It doesn't always allow us to discover another person's worth through direct experiences alone. Sometimes we become too familiar with what is in front of us. We notice habits but overlook character. We remember conversations but miss intention. We become so accustomed to someone's presence that we stop seeing the quiet light they carry. That is why destiny occasionally chooses another voice to reveal what our own eyes have failed to recognize. Your soulmate needed to hear about you from someone who expected nothing in return. There was no emotional attachment influencing the story, no attempt to impress, and no hidden agenda. The honesty of that conversation carried a purity that made every word impossible to dismiss. It wasn't praise seeking attention. It was truth finding the right listener. Imagine a beautiful painting hanging in a familiar room for years. The people who pass by it every day eventually stop noticing its details because it has become part of the background. Then one visitor walks in, pauses, and quietly points out the remarkable colors, the hidden textures, and the incredible craftsmanship that everyone else had overlooked. Suddenly, the painting hasn't changed, but the way people see it changes forever. That is what happened during that private conversation. You did not suddenly become more valuable. You had always carried that value. The only difference was that someone finally described it in a way that allowed your soulmate to truly see what had been there all along. Timing was everything. Had this same conversation happened months or even years earlier, your soulmate might have smiled politely and forgotten every word by the next morning. Their mind may have been distracted by other priorities, other relationships, or other expectations about what they believed mattered most in a person. But life has a remarkable way of preparing people before revealing important truths. Every challenge your soulmate experienced, every disappointment they endured, and every lesson they learned quietly reshaped their heart. Those experiences stripped away superficial expectations and replaced them with a deeper appreciation for authenticity. By the time this unexpected conversation happened, they were no longer searching for someone who simply looked impressive. Their soul had become ready to recognize someone who truly lived with integrity. Every story guided by the universe eventually reaches a moment when silence has fulfilled its purpose. There comes a point when hidden realizations can no longer remain hidden, when thoughts carried quietly for so long begin asking to be spoken aloud. Your soulmate is approaching that moment now. Ever since that unexpected conversation revealed your true value, They have tried to convince themselves that they could simply appreciate you from a distance and continue living as though nothing had changed. They believed the feelings would settle, that time would soften the impact of what they had learned, and that life would eventually pull their attention elsewhere. But the opposite has happened. The more they move forward, the more clearly they understand that what they heard was never just another conversation. It became the moment that quietly divided their life into two chapters, the time before they truly saw you, and everything that came after. What surprises them most is that you never asked anyone to defend your character. You never stood in that room explaining your kindness or listing the good things you've done. You weren't trying to convince anyone that you deserved admiration. In fact, you weren't present at all. Yet somehow your absence became the greatest proof of your authenticity. The people speaking about you had nothing to gain by doing so. Their words weren't rehearsed, exaggerated, or influenced by your presence. They simply described the impact you had left on their lives. That honesty became impossible for your soulmate to ignore, because genuine respect sounds very different from ordinary compliments. Compliments often disappear after the conversation ends, but sincere appreciation leaves a mark that continues growing long after the words have been spoken. Since that day, your soulmate has found themselves imagining what it would feel like to finally tell you the truth. Not simply to tell you that they admire you, but to explain why everything changed. They replay the conversation over and over, remembering the exact moment when one particular sentence reached deeper than the rest. Perhaps someone said you were the kind of person who always showed up when others disappeared. Perhaps they spoke about your quiet loyalty, your patience, or your willingness to help without expecting recognition. Whatever the words were, they carried something far greater than information. They carried confirmation. They confirmed that the kindness your soulmate had occasionally noticed was not temporary. It was the foundation of who you are. That realization became the beginning of a feeling they have never been able to replace. There are moments now when they catch themselves smiling without realizing why. A familiar place reminds them of you. A conversation about loyalty brings your name into their thoughts. Someone else performs a small act of kindness, and immediately they remember the stories they once heard about your heart. It is no longer just your image they carry with them. It is your character. The world often remembers people for what they achieve, but souls remember people for how they make others feel. Your soulmate has come to understand that your greatest strength has never been your appearance, your success, or the way you present yourself to the world. Your greatest strength is the quiet consistency that follows you wherever you go, touching lives in ways you may never fully realize. The universe has been teaching your soulmate one final lesson through all of this. Real value does not need to announce itself because truth naturally finds its own voice. A flower never has to convince anyone of its fragrance. A sunrise never argues that it is beautiful. A river never explains why it deserves to reach the ocean. It simply continues flowing according to its nature. In the same way, you never needed to chase recognition for your worth to become visible. The life you've lived, the choices you've made, and the kindness you've offered have already become your introduction long before you ever entered the room. That unexpected conversation simply allowed your soulmate to hear what your actions had been saying all along. Looking back, they now realize that destiny often works through moments people consider ordinary. If someone had told them that a simple private conversation would completely reshape the way they viewed another person, they probably wouldn't have believed it. They would have expected a dramatic event, an unforgettable encounter, or some extraordinary sign from the universe. Instead, destiny chose something much quieter. It chose honesty. It chose the sincere memories of people whose lives had been touched by yours. Sometimes the greatest revelations don't arrive with noise. They arrive through calm voices speaking undeniable truth. That is why this experience has remained with your soulmate. It wasn't emotional excitement that changed them. It was recognition born from authenticity. One day, when the timing is exactly right, the silence surrounding this realization will finally come to an end. Your soulmate may never remember every word that was spoken during that conversation, but they will always remember how those words made them see you differently. They will remember the moment they realized your value had never depended on what the world noticed. It had always existed in the countless quiet ways you influenced the people around you. And when they finally share this truth with you, it won't feel like the beginning of something new. It will feel like the confirmation of something that had been unfolding long before either of you understood it. Because the most powerful connections are rarely built on first impressions alone. They are built on truth slowly revealing itself until the heart has no choice but to recognize what the soul quietly understood from the very beginning.